I've started Far Cry 5 a few times, but never finished it. There wasn't anything about the game that I disliked, I just didn't have the right mindset to finish it at the time. But this time when it came up, I didn't have any problems finishing it all. It's been 6 years since the game came out, it's had a plethora of content and updates since it first released, and now is, I think, the perfect time to jump in and finish it. First of all, starting off with the PC performance and the PC port, I'd say it's okay. Lining up, I think, with how Ubisoft PC ports were around this time, it's not amazing, but it's not terrible either. I've always had variable performance when it comes to the Far Cry franchise, especially in the last two games that I played, Far Cry 4 and 5, in that my frame rate kind of is all over the place. For a majority of the time, it's okay, but there's quite a few areas in the game where the game kind of dips. It's not unplayable, but it is noticeable. The visuals are still really good, especially from a game from 2018. This came out on the original Xbox One and PlayStation 4, and for a game of that era, I think it still looks great, especially the environments in the open world. That is a standout in my opinion. One thing Ubisoft always delivers on in their games is their environments, level design, and open worlds, and Far Cry 5 is no different. I'd say this is probably one of their better open worlds. There's a lot of great locations to explore, a lot of unique biomes and different looking environments, and you can see a lot of the care and detail that went into designing the world and how it's all laid out. Especially in the Far Cry franchise, there's been a lot of really cool maps. I know they've reused this map a few times with Far Cry New Dawn, and I think they even used it in Primal as well, but I think this is the best version of it. The character models are starting to show their age just a little bit, especially compared to the really good character models we see in AAA games these days, but for 2018, I can see how they were pretty good. Touching back on the open world, there's a lot of stuff to see and do in the game. It's a great open world checklist with a lot of varied content there, from fishing to vehicle sections to exploring cave systems and farmsteads to even some light environmental puzzles. There's a lot there to keep you interested. As for my opinion on the story, I think the story was okay. Like, it was enough to keep you entertained for the time that you're playing the game, but I don't think it was anything super special. I think the characters were more interesting than the story itself. The villains were very memorable with great performances among the bosses and Jacob himself and his family, but I didn't quite get invested in their motivations. I didn't think that the story was particularly strong. Like, the motivation of the cult was a bit vague and didn't make a lot of sense, even with reading a lot of stuff that there was in the game, like a lot of the lore that was around. Like, I understand what they want to do, but I don't really feel the conviction of why they want to do it, other than them just being an antagonistic force that you have to stop. For example, Jacob, the main bad guy, doesn't want to kill our character. Him and his entire family spend the entire game trying to convert Rook over to their side and bring them around to their way of thinking so he can join their team. But in the meantime, Rook has killed like thousands of members of the cult and spends the entire game killing Jacob's family to the point where when there's only Jacob left, he's very angry at Rook, as if he hasn't had multiple chances throughout the story to kill him. There is a lot of times where your character is just point blank at the mercy of these cult members and they don't kill him, even after he has killed thousands of their members and done huge damage to their operation, to the point where he even kills major members of the cult and they still give him more chances to try and join them, which is what I struggled with the most in terms of character motivation, because I feel like if they were so serious about their goals in what they're trying to achieve, they would have just killed Rook early on in the story when they had multiple chances to do so. Looking past that, there's a lot of good moments in the story that make it memorable. There's a lot of interesting set pieces that the Far Cry games have always been known for. The side characters, some of them were interesting, some of them were less interesting. I feel a few of them are just there to fill out the roster of different types of characters you could have by your side. The animals were fun. It was fun to have upgraded animals running around as your companions, fucking up the cult. I thought that was pretty fun. But I'd say most of the sidekicks in the game are pretty forgettable. Aside from Boomer, he's the best. In terms of gameplay and gunplay, I've always felt that the Far Cry universe is okay when it comes to gunplay, but it's never really blown me away. We've been really spoilt in a lot of games with really good gunplay, and I feel like the Far Cry franchise has just had okay gunplay. Like, there's a lot of guns, there's a lot of attachments, but they don't always feel the best to use. A lot of them feel very floaty, and there's not a lot of weight behind them. We've really been spoiled, especially in this Call of Duty era, where we have really good gunplay in a lot of games, and even a lot of indie devs have really figured out the secrets to really satisfying gunplay, and I don't think the Far Cry franchise has really nailed it yet. Speaking of weapons, there's a lot of them to choose from in this game, and although there is a lot, I do feel like actually upgrading them is a bit of a grind. Like, earning money in this game takes a really long time, and I didn't really get a chance to upgrade all of the weapons. There was a lot I didn't or couldn't afford, especially with all of the season pass content that gives you so many different guns and vehicles to unlock that all cost a decent amount of money, which of course is to incentivize you to pay real money for their in-game currency, which I never actually did get tempted to because I don't really feel like it's worth it. There was nothing in the game that made me go, oh my gosh, I need to have that, and therefore I must spend more money on the game. But I realized that some people are going to do it, and therefore they're going to capitalize on that as much as they can. The skill tree was also just alright. There was a lot of things in there that were kind of just like minuscule upgrades that you barely felt. But then again, there was a lot of upgrades that I did like. For example, a lot of the ones like traversing around the map, fast traveling, and being able to drop down from maximum height in your wingsuit was great. A lot of things like that, but a lot of the stuff in the skill tree we've seen in other Far Cry games before, so there wasn't anything in there that blew me away. As for the end of the story and the end of the game, I thought it was really well done. I thought it was an interesting end to the game that led off into some more interesting content in follow-up games, and it wasn't an ending that I actually expected, which is good. I like endings that I can't always predict, and I was happy with the way that this one ended. I did play a little bit of the DLC, which I don't really want to go into detail here. I played a little bit, but I didn't really find it that interesting. It was alright for an hour or two, but there wasn't anything in the DLC that made me want to really put in the time to finish all of the content that was there. I'm glad I got it with the game in the Gold Edition and didn't have to pay extra for it. Overall, Far Cry 5 is pretty good. I feel like there's a lot of value for here if you can get it pretty cheap, and it does go on sale a lot these days. And if you're just looking for an open world game to have a bit of fun in, then this is definitely one of those. Resident Evil 7 is a game that I never thought that I'd actually own. I'd watched a bunch of people play it when it first came out, and over the years since it's released, I've watched multiple people play through it, so the story wasn't exactly something that was unknown to me. But I have found myself playing through the Resident Evil franchise over the last couple years, and Resident Evil 7 was the next game for me to try. And I remember really liking the story from what I'd seen, so I figured I'd pick it up for cheap and play through it and see how I liked it. Starting off with the port is really good, especially in this day and age with more powerful hardware. I was able to play the game at max settings with ray tracing on and was still above 100 FPS for pretty much the entire game. It still looks fantastically gross in that it is a very gloopy and disgustingly beautiful horror game. There's a lot of grime and a lot of really gross texture work throughout the game that makes it morbidly fascinating everywhere you look, especially in the start of the game. I didn't have any problems with the controls or any technical problems with the port itself, so I would give it like an A+. I think it was a really well optimized game. The only problem I did have with the game itself, I think, is the low FOV, and not being able to change that a whole lot made it really difficult for me to get through. I struggle to play through games where I can't turn the FOV up plus 90 to 95, and in this game I realize it may have been a design decision to keep you more enclosed and claustrophobic, but it was a struggle, I think, in the claustrophobic areas of the house with such a narrow field of view to navigate sometimes. I think it would have benefited the game more if I was able to turn up the FOV more. The game has really good darkness. I think some of the best darkness I've seen in a horror game. It's really thick and enveloping, and it feels like you're completely lost in it. In a lot of environments in the game, you feel like you're in this darkness soup that isn't just pitch black. Like, a lot of games kind of fall into the trap where darkness is just so black that it feels like your screen is off, but this game feels like there's substance there beyond the murkiness that I really enjoyed. The scares throughout the game were still really good for a horror game. There was a few jump scares, but I think for the most part it was a very well paced horror game, which is what I enjoy the most when a game goes down the horror route. I feel like throwing out cheap jump scares is just a way to make me hate your horror game. If you can't build up good tension in a horror game, then there's not a lot of mastery in your craft, and I feel it's really cheap. Like, anyone can get you with a jump scare, but it takes really good direction and environment and sound design and game design to kind of build together to get you on ease and get you really tense for a good scare. And this game definitely knows how to build a great horror atmosphere and let you sit in it, let you breathe in it. It's not just jump scare after jump scare after jump scare, which I really enjoyed. The environments are really well designed, and there's a lot of hidden items. I only missed a few, but I had to really hunt for quite a lot of them, and I felt that the house design was really well planned out. I was constantly impressed by how much thought and design went into the overall layout and design of the house. I was really impressed. The music is pretty good, with a lot of spooky tracks to keep you in the moment, and it's not just all high strings that irritate your ears all the time. There's a lot of really good moments where they allow the silence to build into good tracks that also build the tension as well, which I really enjoyed. And the game is not afraid just to let itself sit in silence for a long time either. There's a lot of moments where there's just no music and it's just you there with the environment and the sound design, which I really enjoyed. The sound effects were top tier, like really well made and built great atmosphere along with the music. The story was just as good as I remember it. It was just as enthralling as I remember it. After seeing like 4 or 5 people play through it, you'd think it'd lose some of its edge, but I think just enough time had passed from me watching that content to me playing it now that I was able to remember some of the moments, but not all of them, which meant that I was able to enjoy the game a lot and really take in the story, read all the notes, find out what the game was trying to tell me. It was really good. Just a good, satisfying story from start to finish with well-paced moments throughout. Some negatives: I thought that the sound design for the weapons was kind of weak, and that the weapons themselves felt pretty weak in the game. They didn't sound very cool. A lot of them weren't very punchy or weighty. It kind of felt like you were walking around with a water gun for most of the game. Even when you had some of the more powerful weapons in the game, they didn't feel very powerful, which I get from a horror game perspective. You're not meant to feel powerful, but sometimes I wish developers kind of respected guns more and how destructive they can be and loud they can be. Overall, I don't have a lot of negatives to say about the game. It was really good, and I can see why a lot of people like it. Definitely one of the better games I've played this year. Rounding out our games for the year, I want to briefly talk a little bit about Hard West 2, which is a turn-based RPG set in the Wild West. I have played the first game a little bit, but definitely didn't finish it. I got about halfway through it before I kind of dropped the game. And this one, I think, improved on the first game in just about every regard. The game ran pretty well. Like, there were some FPS drops and performance hiccups in the bigger levels, but it was nothing major. It didn't stop me from enjoying the game. The controls were intuitive. They could be a little bit finicky at times, but for the most part, I thought that they were well thought out and planned. And I didn't have any crashes or anything like that. It just seems like it's a solid port. The music is pretty good. Nothing outstanding, but it definitely suited a lot of the moments in the game. I think the biggest surprise for me and the best thing about this game is definitely the voice acting, just because this game has the late great Kevin Conroy in it. I love his work in just about everything I find it in, especially Batman, as I'm sure a lot of people enjoy his work the most with that character. I went into this game not knowing he was attached at all, and just to hear him as a side character throughout the entire game just brought my heart joy anytime I heard him. He is the reason that I wanted to sit through all of the dialogue I can find in this game. His character wasn't super unique, but he did bring a sense of gravitas to the character that just made me want to listen to everything he had to say. It was kind of a detriment to the game because what he brought to the character kind of made all the other characters a bit lame in comparison. Like, I just wanted to hear him throughout the entire game, and any other conversation that wasn't him wasn't as good just because it was him. Not to say that they were bad, like, a lot of the voice acting in this game is really good, but just hearing his voice just was on another level. As I said, some of the characters were a bit boring, but there was other good characters in the game that made up for that. Some of your companions were definitely a bit generic, but they all had good stories and they were well voice acted, so it was worth listening to what they had to say. As for the game itself, I found that it was really difficult and quite frustrating at times. Being turn-based in the XCOM style, there were a lot of levels where you were really punished for trying anything new. I did a lot of save scumming in this game just to get a good, clean fight. There was a lot of scenarios where you were put in a distinct disadvantage, and it was very challenging to fight your way out if you did not have a good setup from the beginning, or if you were not ready for the encounter to come. There is a good flow to combat when you're fully upgraded and when you have really powerful weapons, but you never stay in that flow for very long. There's a lot of things that disrupt you. There's a lot of times when the math behind the game just kind of bones you out of nowhere, and no matter what you can do, nothing works for you. And it really becomes a battle of attrition because it's you and 4 of your characters against like sometimes 50 opponents throughout the entire level, and there's not a lot of healing in this game to really get you back up to full. So sometimes it's like you and one character hanging on with like 4 health trying to get through the end of the level. It felt like there was a correct way to do the level, and there wasn't a lot of room for experimentation outside of that sometimes. It was satisfying to get into a good flow, but there were so many things that could break it. Damage was king in a lot of the loadouts, and even though the card system to upgrade characters was fun, there wasn't a lot of strategy in the loadouts. It just felt like you wanted a rifle with a good damage that you could chain into getting as many kills as possible throughout the entire thing. A lot of the final fights in the campaign felt very punishing, even unfair at a lot of times, with what the game expected you to do. The overworld exploration was really fun though. It felt like a lot of the Wasteland games where you had to explore a map and come across unique scenarios in the overworld. A lot of them were really well written, and there were a lot of cool little interactions with you and your party. The story was simple, but it was satisfying throughout the entire thing. I wasn't expecting a Stephen King style of story or anything like that. It was just a very simple story that delivered and was satisfying throughout. The ending was interesting, but it was very sequel baity, which I didn't really enjoy. I didn't think the ending was super satisfying. It was kind of just a setup for the next game, which I don't even know if there will be another game. I don't know how well this game sold or if the studio feels like doing a sequel. But if they do, they definitely have the perfect place to pick up from with this ending. So overall, I thought it was a pretty good time. I enjoyed my time going through the game, even though it was brutally hard and challenging sometimes. I do feel like the story, characters, and gameplay were worth it though. Those are the games that I played last month. Let me know what you've been playing down in the comment section below. I always love to read your comments. Other than that, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you, beautiful people, in the next video.